Ross Ulbricht grew up under the vast open skies of Albuquerque, New Mexico. It was a normal childhood, or so it seemed. He was a Boy Scout. He played in the dirt. He built forts with friends. But even then, something different was stirring inside him. He wasn't just playing. He was building, creating, and thinking. His mind was always a few steps ahead, exploring possibilities others couldn't see. The world around him was a puzzle, and he was determined to figure out how all the pieces fit together. He was quiet, observant, and possessed a curiosity that couldn't be contained by the quiet suburban streets of his hometown. His early fascination wasn't with sports or the typical hobbies of boys his age. Instead, Ross was drawn to the glow of a computer screen. Technology was his playground. He tinkered with old machines, taking them apart and putting them back together just to understand their inner workings. He learned to code, not in a formal classroom at first, but through sheer force of will and endless hours of experimentation. The digital world was a place of infinite potential, a realm where the rules of the physical world didn't always apply. This was where he felt most at home, a place where he could build his own reality, line by line of code. This digital obsession was more than a hobby. It was the beginning of a worldview. Ross saw the internet as a new frontier, a place of ultimate freedom. It was a space where individuals could connect and interact without the watchful eyes of authority. He spent countless nights bathed in the monitor's light, exploring the burgeoning online communities, learning the languages of the web, and absorbing the libertarian ideals that flourished in its hidden corners. He wasn't just learning to program, he was learning about a different way of living, a philosophy that would come to define his entire life and set him on a collision course with the world. Even as a young man, Ross felt a disconnect from the mainstream. While his peers were focused on school dances and weekend parties, his mind was wrestling with complex ideas about economics, government, and personal liberty. He was an Eagle Scout, a testament to his discipline and intelligence, yet he always felt like an outsider looking in. This feeling of not quite belonging, of seeing the world through a different lens, planted a seed. It was a seed of ambition, a desire to create something monumental, something that would not just change his own life, but challenge the very foundations of society itself. He was just a boy from Albuquerque, but his dreams were already larger than the desert sky. Ross's academic journey took him away from New Mexico to the University of Texas at Dallas, where he studied physics. He was a brilliant student, easily grasping complex scientific principles, but his true passion was shifting. Physics described the laws of the universe, but Ross was becoming more interested in the laws that governed people. He devoured books on economics, particularly the Austrian school, which championed free markets and minimal government interference. Thinkers like Ludwig von Mises became his new heroes. He saw their theories not as abstract ideas, but as a blueprint for a better, freer world. His mind was a sponge, soaking up every concept that questioned authority and celebrated individual choice. After earning his undergraduate degree, he moved on to Penn State University for his master's in materials science and engineering. He was on a conventional path to success, a promising scientist with a bright future. Yet a growing restlessness gnawed at him. The structured world of academia felt confining. He found himself drawn into late-night political debates with his peers, passionately arguing for libertarian ideals. He spoke of a world without taxes, without regulations, without a government telling people what they could and could not do. These weren't just casual discussions. They were the stirrings of a revolutionary. He was building the intellectual framework for what was to come. His personal journals from this time reveal a mind in turmoil. He wrote about his deep-seated belief that state coercion was the greatest evil in the world. He felt that every tax dollar, every regulation, was a form of violence against individual freedom. This wasn't just a political opinion, it was a moral conviction that burned within him. He felt an intense, almost spiritual calling to do something about it. He didn't just want to debate these ideas in a university hall. He wanted to bring them to life. He dreamed of creating a space where his economic and philosophical beliefs could be put into practice, a real-world experiment in pure liberty. This intellectual awakening was also a period of profound personal change. Ross began to drift away from the scientific career he had been building. The lab felt sterile, disconnected from the grand world-changing ideas that now consumed him. He started experimenting with psychedelic drugs, seeking to expand his consciousness and break free from conventional thinking. He was searching for an answer, a path that would allow him to make his mark on the world. The journey from a promising physicist to a libertarian ideologue was nearly complete. All he needed was the right tool, the right platform, to turn his radical vision into a reality. Leaving academia behind, Ross returned to Austin, Texas, a city known for its independent spirit. But he felt more isolated than ever. His friends were starting careers, getting married, and settling into conventional lives. Ross, on the other hand, was an outsider, consumed by a dream that no one around him seemed to understand. He tried his hand at various ventures, a video game company, an investment fund, but they all felt hollow. They were just businesses operating within the very system he so desperately wanted to escape. He yearned to create something that would be a direct challenge to the status quo, a true free market. This feeling of isolation fueled his determination. He spent his days reading, thinking, and planning. He saw himself as a pioneer, a man destined to create a new economic paradigm. His journal entries became more grandiose, filled with pronouncements about his destiny to change the world. He wrote about creating a place where people could buy and sell anything they wanted, free from the prying eyes and heavy hand of the government. It was a bold, audacious idea, and it was one that completely possessed him. He was no longer just a dreamer. He was an architect drawing up the blueprints for a revolution. The core of his dream was a market that operated on principles of pure anonymity and freedom. He believed that if people could trade without fear of judgment or punishment, the world would be a better place. He envisioned a system where individuals were sovereign, where their choices were their own, and where the market, not the state, was the ultimate arbiter. It was a utopian vision, but one he believed was achievable through technology. He wasn't trying to build a small business. He was trying to build a new society, one transaction at a time. The scale of his ambition was immense, matched only by his growing sense of purpose. This intense focus came at a personal cost. His relationships strained under the weight of his obsession. He grew distant from family and friends who couldn't grasp the magnitude of what he was trying to accomplish. He was living in two worlds, the ordinary, everyday world he was forced to inhabit, and the secret, revolutionary world he was building in his mind. The disconnect was profound, but for Ross, the sacrifice was necessary. He believed he was on the verge of something historic, a project that would finally give his life meaning and prove his radical ideas to the world. The stage was set for his grand experiment. The missing piece of Ross's puzzle was technology. How could he create a truly anonymous marketplace? The regular internet was too exposed, too easily monitored. His search for a solution led him to the dark web, a hidden corner of the internet accessible only through special software like the Tor browser. Tor, which stands for the Onion Router, encrypts user data and bounces it through a global network of volunteer relays, making it nearly impossible to trace a user's location or identity. For Ross, discovering Tor was like finding a hidden continent. It was the perfect foundation for his free market utopia, a place shielded from the eyes of the state. With the platform secured, he needed a currency. Traditional payment systems like credit cards and bank transfers were tied to real-world identities, making them useless for an anonymous market. The answer came in the form of a new emerging digital currency, Bitcoin. Created in 2009, Bitcoin was decentralized and pseudonymous. Transactions were recorded on a public ledger called the blockchain, but the identities of the users were hidden behind cryptographic addresses. It was the perfect, untraceable medium of exchange for the empire he planned to build. The combination of Tor and Bitcoin was the technological breakthrough he had been waiting for. In early 2011, working alone from his laptop, Ross Ulbricht brought his vision to life. He meticulously coded the website, naming it Silk Road, an homage to the ancient trade route that connected East and West and facilitated the exchange of valuable goods. The site was launched with a simple, powerful mission statement: to be a place where anyone could buy and sell anything with complete anonymity. He announced its creation on a few niche online forums, a quiet launch for what would become one of the most notorious websites in history. Under the pseudonym Dread Pirate Roberts, Ross became the invisible captain of this new digital vessel. The initial offerings were modest, mostly psychedelic mushrooms that Ross had grown himself. But the concept was revolutionary, and word spread like wildfire through the hidden communities of the dark web. Silk Road was more than just a website. It was a statement. It was a direct challenge to government prohibition and a tangible manifestation of Ross's libertarian ideals. He had done it. He had created his free market, a digital island operating outside the law. The quiet boy from Albuquerque had become the founder and sole operator of a burgeoning online empire, a king ruling over a kingdom of shadows. The growth of Silk Road was, honestly, explosive. What started out as a small marketplace for just a handful of goods quickly ballooned into this sprawling digital bazaar. It became, well, the Amazon of the dark web. Users could find almost anything imaginable, though its notoriety really came from the vast quantities of illegal drugs being sold there. Heroin, cocaine, LSD, and ecstasy were listed right alongside forged documents, hacking services, and counterfeit goods. The site rolled out a user-friendly interface, complete with vendor profiles, customer reviews, and even an escrow system to make sure transactions were fair. It was, frankly, a remarkably sophisticated and professional operation, which only made it more appealing and fueled its rapid expansion. As the site's administrator, Dread Pirate Roberts, or DPR as he was known, was a constant presence. He was, in a sense, the philosopher king of this digital domain. He wrote these long, eloquent posts on the site's forums, sharing his libertarian philosophy and justifying Silk Road's existence as a moral and political imperative. He wasn't just a drug lord. He presented himself as a visionary leader fighting for freedom. He fostered this real sense of community among the users, who saw themselves not as criminals but as pioneers in a new liberated economy. DPR was their hero, a mysterious figure who had given them a safe haven to conduct their business. The sheer volume of transactions was staggering. Within just 2 years, Silk Road had facilitated over $1 billion in sales, with Ross taking a commission on every single one. Millions of dollars in Bitcoin flowed into his digital wallets, making him an incredibly wealthy man. He managed the site with meticulous care, constantly updating its security features and overseeing the growing ecosystem of buyers and sellers. He was the CEO, the head of customer service, and the chief ideologue of a massive illegal enterprise. He was, in a way, living his dream, proving that a market could thrive without any government oversight or regulation. But, this success brought immense pressure. The site became a magnet for law enforcement agencies all around the world. The FBI, DEA, and Homeland Security were all desperate to unmask Dread Pirate Roberts and take down his empire. The larger Silk Road grew, the bigger the target on its back became. Ross was now engaged in a high-stakes game of cat and mouse with the most powerful government on Earth. He was no longer just a coder or a dreamer. He was the kingpin of a global criminal network, and the walls were slowly, inevitably, beginning to close in around him. The rise of his empire was, honestly, spectacular, but its foundations were built on shifting digital sand. To stay ahead of law enforcement, Ross Ulbricht had to become a ghost. He operated under a strict code of digital hygiene, a set of rules designed to erase his tracks and protect his identity as Dread Pirate Roberts. He used Tor for all his online activities, routing his internet connection through a labyrinth of encrypted servers. He communicated using sophisticated PGP encryption, making his messages unreadable to anyone without the proper key. He was living a double life, meticulously separating his real-world identity from his online persona. To his friends and family, he was just Ross, an unassuming and slightly aimless young man. Online, he was a powerful, untouchable figure. His operational security was obsessive. He never used his real name or any personal information in his online dealings. He configured his laptop with multiple layers of security, including full disk encryption, making the data on it inaccessible without a password. He often worked from public places like cafes and libraries, using their Wi-Fi networks to further obscure his location. He was a master of misdirection, a digital phantom who seemed to exist everywhere and nowhere at once. For years, this meticulous approach worked. Law enforcement agencies were stumped. They knew Dread Pirate Roberts existed, but they had no idea who he was or where to find him. DPR also ruled his digital kingdom with an iron fist. He was not just a passive administrator, he was the law on Silk Road. He enforced a strict set of rules, banning the sale of anything related to child exploitation, stolen credit cards, and weapons of mass destruction. This was his attempt at a moral code, a way to distinguish his free market from a purely chaotic one. When users scammed others or vendors sold dangerous products, DPR would intervene, sometimes banning them from the site. He even allegedly went so far as to order assassinations on individuals he believed threatened his operation, though these hits were never actually carried out. Despite his extreme caution, the pressure was immense. Living as a ghost was an isolating and paranoid existence. He could never relax, never let his guard down. Every keystroke was a potential risk. Every online session, a potential trap. He was the sole architect and guardian of a billion-dollar enterprise, and the weight of that responsibility was crushing. He was a prisoner of his own creation, trapped in a digital fortress he had built to be impenetrable. But even the strongest fortress can have a crack, and it would only take one small mistake for the entire structure to come crashing down. For years, Ross Ulbricht's digital discipline was nearly flawless. He was a ghost, a phantom who left no trace. But the immense pressure of running a global criminal enterprise alone began to take its toll. The turning point, the single mistake that would ultimately lead to his downfall, was remarkably small. It was a single thread that, once pulled, would unravel his entire carefully constructed web of anonymity. The mistake happened early in Silk Road's history, long before Ross had perfected his operational security, and before he was the infamous Dread Pirate Roberts. It was a moment of carelessness from a time when the stakes were not yet so high. In the very early days of the site, while trying to promote it, Ross posted a question on a popular coding forum, Stack Overflow. He was seeking help with a specific piece of code related to connecting to a hidden service on the Tor network. The post itself was innocuous, but in a fatal lapse of judgment, he initially made the post using his personal email address, which contained his full name, Ross Ulbricht. He quickly realized his mistake and changed his username on the forum to Frosty. But the digital breadcrumb had been left. It was a tiny, forgotten clue, buried deep within the vast expanse of the internet. For a long time, this clue went unnoticed. But as the federal investigation into Silk Road intensified, agents began a painstaking search for any information about the site's creator. IRS agent Gary Alford, a tenacious investigator on the case, started digging into the earliest mentions of Silk Road online. He scoured old forum posts and chat logs, looking for the first person who ever talked about the site. His search led him back to the very first online announcements, which he then cross-referenced with other posts made by the same users. It was a digital archaeological dig, sifting through layers of forgotten data. Alford eventually connected the user who first promoted Silk Road to the user Frosty on Stack Overflow. And there, in the edit history of that old post, he found it. The name Ross Ulbricht. It was the breakthrough the investigation had been waiting for. Suddenly, the mythical Dread Pirate Roberts had a name, a face, and a history. Investigators began to build a case, linking Ross Ulbricht to the Silk Road through his Gmail account, his online writings, and his movements. The ghost in the machine was starting to materialize. That one simple mistake, made years earlier, had cracked his fortress wide open. Once the FBI had a name, the hunt for Ross Ulbricht began in earnest. They tracked his movements, monitored his online activity, and slowly pieced together his life. They discovered he was living in San Francisco, often working from public libraries and cafes. The challenge now was not just to arrest him, but to catch him in the act. They needed to seize his laptop while it was open and unencrypted, giving them access to the administrative panels of Silk Road and the vast fortune in Bitcoin he controlled. A simple arrest at his apartment wouldn't be enough. They needed to catch the king in his castle. The FBI devised a clever and elaborate plan. They would stage a public disturbance to distract him, allowing them to grab his laptop before he could close it or trigger its encryption. The chosen location was the Glen Park branch of the San Francisco Public Library, a place they had observed Ross frequenting. The plan was high risk. If he suspected anything, he could wipe the entire machine with a single keystroke, destroying years of evidence. The agents rehearsed the operation meticulously, planning for every possible contingency. The suspense was palpable. The fate of the entire investigation hinged on a few critical seconds. On October 1st, 2013, the plan was put into motion. Ross Ulbricht sat at a table in the sci-fi section of the library, his laptop open before him. He was logged into Silk Road's administrator panel, communicating with a user who was, unbeknownst to him, an undercover agent. Outside, a team of FBI agents prepared to make their move. Two agents, a man and a woman, entered the library and began to argue loudly near Ross's table, creating a commotion. As Ross turned his head, distracted by the shouting, a third agent swiftly moved in from behind, grabbing the open laptop and handing it off. It was over in an instant. Before Ross could even process what was happening, he was surrounded. "I'm with the FBI," one agent said calmly. He was placed under arrest, his hands cuffed behind his back. He was stunned, his face a mask of disbelief. The library, a place of quiet contemplation, had become the stage for the dramatic takedown of the world's most wanted cybercriminal. The trap had been sprung perfectly. The FBI had their man, and more importantly, they had his computer, the digital keys to his entire dark web kingdom, open and exposed. The ghost had been captured. The arrest of Ross Ulbricht sent shockwaves through the digital underground and the world at large. The mythical Dread Pirate Roberts was revealed to be a 29-year-old man from Texas with an advanced degree and a libertarian dream. His trial was a media sensation, a landmark case for the digital age that raised complex questions about privacy, freedom, and the limits of the law in the internet era. The prosecution painted him as a ruthless drug kingpin, a digital mob boss who facilitated over $1 billion in illegal sales and even attempted to have people killed to protect his empire. They presented a mountain of evidence pulled from his captured laptop. Ross's defense team argued that he was a naive idealist who had created the site but had handed it off to others long before his arrest. They portrayed him as the fall guy, a scapegoat for a much larger operation. They argued that Silk Road, for all its faults, had reduced street violence by moving the drug trade online into a safer, more controlled environment. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. The jury was not swayed by the philosophical arguments. After a dramatic trial, Ross Ulbricht was found guilty on all counts, including drug trafficking, computer hacking, and money laundering. The libertarian dream had turned into a legal nightmare. The consequences for Ross were severe. The judge, making an example of him, handed down a sentence of stunning finality. 2 life sentences plus 40 years with no possibility of parole. It was a sentence harsher than those given to many violent criminals or cartel leaders. The judge stated that his creation of Silk Road was terribly destructive to our social fabric. For Ross, the fall was absolute. The man who dreamed of creating a world without state control would now spend the rest of his life within the walls of a federal prison, his freedom completely extinguished. The kingpin had been dethroned and locked away forever. The story of Ross Ulbricht is a modern tragedy, a complex tale of brilliance, ambition, and hubris. It serves as a powerful lesson about the dark side of idealism when untethered from consequence and law. He was a genius who used his talents to build something truly revolutionary, but his creation ultimately unleashed forces he could not control. His journey from a quiet boy in Albuquerque to the world's most infamous dark web kingpin is a cautionary tale about the seductive power of ideology and the fine line between being a visionary and a criminal. In the end, his quest for ultimate freedom led him to the ultimate form of captivity.